All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about the lifecycle events for an Alpine application. Now, when I'm talking about the lifecycle, I'm talking about the application lifecycle because we've already talked about Alpine init, and you could see it on screen there. And that fires when Alpine is ready, and you could begin defining your applications. But there's actually things that we can do within the application itself to listen to certain events while it runs. So there'll be three of those, and we're going to start with the first one, which is the init method. And this is something that you could use when your application loads. Now, I have an example here of an application that is going to use an API and tell you what events happened on this day. So in my HTML, you can see I have events for and then x text equals date. I'm waiting for that information to come. And then I'm going to loop over a set of events and show the text and the year that it happened. If we go on my code, you can see I do have initial values for both of those variables, so an empty array and an empty string. Now let's get started. Now, if I was not using JavaScript, I could use x-init, but because I am, I'm just going to drop an init method right in my code. And now this is going to run when my application is loaded. And you could see I have a date now. It is just X, so it's hard-coded. But now it shows you, kind of how this looks. But let's actually make this real. I'm going to hit my API, and this is a great free API from Muffin Labs, and it defaults to this date. I'll make that a bit wider so you can see. Now I'm hitting a remote API. I'm using a wait, which does mean I need to add the async keyword in there. But now my code is going to hit that API, convert it to JSON, and then the response of that contains the date, in this case, when I'm recording, June 30th, and an array of events. And to keep things a little bit simple, I sliced it down to 10. But now you could see my application will set up some initial values and then run some code on startup. So this init method is something I pretty much have in every single application because typically there's things I need to do when the application is starting up. So that's one part of the lifecycle. The next thing is that Alpine allows us to write custom code when our variables change. One of the ways it does that is with the watch method. Now, the watch method will allow you to observe any Alpine data, even something that's very nested, etc. And you get the old value and the new value. So that may not make sense. So let's look at an example of that. And you could see it in place here. So I'm using watch, and because I'm doing this within code, it's going to be this $watch. And I'm going to give it a variable that I care about. In this case, it's just events. And you see I'm passing that as a string. The function that I associate with that will get two arguments, new value and old value, and then I can do whatever makes sense with it. In this case, I'm just using console.log and saying how the array changed. And if we open up our console, we could see that it went from 0 to 10 as we expect. And while not terribly practical to just console.log it, you can imagine doing more complex logic and just being able to handle your data changing and doing validation, etc. Now, our next method is a little bit different. It's effect. And with effect, Alpine will run a function immediately, but also intelligently look at it and see what variables that are being used in that function. And if any of those variables change, it will read it, it will run it again. Now, this could be done in our HTML with xEffect, or we can do it in code using Alpine.effect. So again, a bit different from the last one. And notice my function has no arguments passed to it, But within it, I am using this.date. So because it runs the function immediately and I start off with an empty string, we could see date is now, and then it's just a empty string. When the date changes, again, this is after that API call and the data comes in, and then I set the value, it runs again. So both watch and effect, they kind of do the same thing, but they have different behaviors. You have to think about what makes sense for your application. Nice thing is that Alpine gives you these methods to hook into those changes. Enjoy.